Welcome back to another exciting video of Real Recapped. Today I'm going to explain the 8th and final episode of the second volume, and the overall 26th episode of Love, Death Plus Robots called The Drowned Gaint. When a 200-foot-tall naked body washes ashore outside a small fishing village, crowds gather to witness the spectacle. A local scientist documents the Leviathan's surrender to nature. In Love, Death and Robots Season 2, Episode 8 The Drowned Gaint, when the corpse of a real-life giant washes ashore in a small town, an academic's life is changed as he documents the evolution of the corpse's decay. Netflix's anthology series, featuring a selection of short animated films, was created by Tim Miller in partnership with series executive producer David Fincher. The first season, Love, Death and Robots Volume 1 premiered on Netflix in 2019. So let's dive into the story, but before we start don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our channel to get some interesting stuff and upcoming videos. The Drowned Gaint is the final episode of the second volume of short stories adapted for the screen. The Love, Death and Robots Season 2 episode follows the narrator as he describes what happens to the dead body of a giant, naked human being after it's discovered on the beach of a fishing village. The short film is based on the story by J.G. Ballard. Originally published in 1964, the speculative short story written by Ballard and adapted for the Netflix show is like something out of the Odyssey or Gulliver's Travels. It's a fable about a monster who resembles a giant human being. The giant's story of decay serves as a metaphor for many things. It's a critic of consumerism and exploitation as well as a parable on identity and death. As the story explores the performative aspects of death, the narrator questions what it means to be human, and how or when we lose our humanity. In Love, Death and Robots The Drowned Gaint, the narrator observes the mythical creature's deterioration. First, through a natural progression caused by the passing of time as animals, nature, weather, and the elements take a toll on the deceased corpse. But then one day the scientist notices an arm has been amputated, and later, the head. Until all of the qualities of personality and the human characteristics of the giant have vanished completely. The giant's death has taken on a life of its own. The Drowned Gaint is exactly what it sounds like. The story begins with a rumor that something has washed up on the beach. And it's big. A giant, what looks like an adolescent, is lying naked on his back and is dead. Presumably drowned, though no one attempted CPR. He was youthful, frail, for a giant, and Billy Crystal, thank goodness, was nowhere in sight. As more people began to gather, they inched closer. He had a pond-sized fist of water playing in his palm, noted a stoic observer. He walked away when a few jokesters began to climb the giant like he was their playground. The stoic man with glasses turns back, and what he sees is callous. Everyone is treating this giant boy as a circus attraction. Sliding down the chest, legs, and taking pictures with their heads in the deceased nostrils. It's a distanced image. I'm sure if they saw a picture or video of themselves, they would question if they dissociated from that moment. Like that Guardian photo of a couple of people relaxing by the waterfront and watching the Twin Towers fall. It's an image you won't soon forget. The days pass. It takes a while to disable the body. The giant has started to decompose, no longer looking youthful but weathered. They want to start to cut by his tail and hip bones. So, only the torso remains. Pieces of the young man have gone all over town, including the femur above a butcher shop sign. Even the giant's male appendage is now on display. Like in a glass jar you find in a coroner's office, but much larger. Filled with water and 20% alcohol. Most people mistook it for a whale PS, showing that everyone has forgotten the giant, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and the ridiculousness of it all. As I mentioned above, it also shows the hubris of what can be the fall of humankind. The Love, Death and Robots episode doesn't focus on where the giant came from. The people are more interested in the sensational aspects of the event, and the entertainment value of it. Something has happened in their small, fishing town and they want to be a part of the legend that gets told about the giant long after the body has become only a collection of its parts. Just when he thinks the allure of the giant has faded from the townspeople's memory, the narrator notices pieces of the giant around town. A large bone, like an awning, hangs above a shop in one scene. The bones and body parts, no longer whole or human, have become mere decoration. In the episode's final scene, the giant's male appendage is on display inside a large circus tent. This is taken directly from the original story. Ballard closes with this detail to emphasize the humiliation and degradation of the giant, and man's superficial and exploitative nature. As the narrator explains, the circus has incorrectly labeled it as belonging to a whale. And here, in the end, the giant has been completely stripped of his humanity, remembered by the single body part mislabeled as belonging to an animal, Another possibility is that the giant was never human at all, but a metaphor for man's treatment of beached whales, giant beasts of the sea. As the narrator watches the evolution of the giant's body and the many forms it takes on as time passes, the story becomes a meditation on life and death. The giant's identity has been replaced in the eyes of the living, but the narrator takes solace in the fact that parts of the giant's body have remained in nature, becoming one with the sand and the sea. Netflix's Love, Death and Robots reintroduces Ballard's The Drowned Giant to audiences who continue to contemplate the meaning behind the classic tale decades after its first publication. The anti-gestational tendency of the story forces the reader to confront a fundamental problem found in much of the best literature and science fiction: what is it to be human? If one loses something as crucial as a limb, is one's identity retained? What about several limbs? Ahead? As in other of Ballard's works, this selection illustrates a kind of uncomfortable view of evolution and adaptation. As components of the body are faced with selective pressures, they often adapt other functions that were previously impossible, culminating in a recognizable, distinct specimen made up of such parts. In The Drowned Giant, the process occurs in reverse until a distinct identity becomes impossible, but one can never quite pinpoint at what moment it ceases to be a giant and becomes a skeleton, or a disfigured collection of parts. Are the components now discrete wholes of their own and divested of their connection to the strange colossus? The systematic dismantling of the body is focused on with excruciating detail, often calling to mind the detached, clinical depictions of morbid processes in the works of Kafka, such as the torture mechanism in the penal colony. This narrative style is a crucial part of what makes the story so profoundly unsettling. The giant is clearly not too distant a relative from humanity, and yet its fetishized destruction is a product of the all-too-human urge to reappropriate. We are, after all, makers and users of tools and totems. Although the story turns upon a weird premise, the behavior subsequent to the giant's appearance seems all too normal and loses its spectacular qualities. With this loss of identity, and the few traces of personality that had clung tenuously to the figure, the interest of the spectators expired. Like Shirley Jackson's The Summer People, there is a kind of unsettling consonance to the human behavior depicted, a challenging effect to achieve for any writer. While the giant itself is of obvious significance, so too is the manner in which news of its arrival is disseminated and consumed. The anonymous I and we are linked to the circulation of news about the spectacle that is the giant. Note, particularly, the distinct use of the passive voice in the first two sentences: the giant's body is acted upon, and the consumers of the news are similarly acted upon, which subtly reinforces the theme of spectacle consumption as a numbing agent. From the beginning, accounts of the giant circulated around the city in a fashion that morbidly parodies the water circulation around the city of its constituent limbs, bones, and other assorted components. Over time, the giant's arrival has been forgotten, but his constituent parts remain and begin to show up in seemingly random locations. Instead of a giant, it is now a jawbone, a humerus, a square of skin, etc. Instead of novelty, its pieces are now unremarkable. In keeping with the story's ironic trajectory, the abnormality of the giant becomes progressively more mundane, a likely commentary on the numbing effects of superficial mass entertainment. The juxtaposition of the mundane and the spectacular is just one of many such contradictions present in The Drowned Giant and the rest of Ballard's work. Presented here are life and death, the animate, anonymous collective and inanimate, identifiable singular, utility and futility, the mysterious otherworldly, and the rational investigations of science. Decades after publication, Ballard's speculative work remains as weird as ever, with just as much disquieting relevance to current readers. We hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and see you next time on another Real Recapped.